Hello and welcome back to the Brick Railway Builders podcast, a podcast all about Lego trains. This is an interview style podcast where I introduce everybody in the hobby to everyone. Joining me for this episode is winner for Best Steam Locomotive and a couple of Lego train competitions. It's Awout Rolling. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello, I am doing very well, thank you.
I thought I'd try and slide in a bit of a different intro by mentioning the fact that you've won a couple of Lego train competitions, which is one of the coolest things ever.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. It's been a wild couple years, all these little prizes. It's fantastic.
I do remember as well. So one of the competitions, the one that I hosted, I remember that the Brick Train Awards for a year or two ago got pushed back from February back to September. So the Lego Train Club I'm in said, you know what, we'll host one, but it's going to be UK only. And a few months went by, and I thought, well, the Brick Train Awards isn't happening. I'm going to try hosting one. And I was able to get prizes and sponsors and the full shebang. And I also got printed bricks. But I remember when you received your prize, you sent me a message saying you spelt locomotive wrong. I was like, oh god, I did, didn't I?
Yeah, that was. I mean, that makes it more special, right? Like if you ran another one, I would have sort of a unique thing going because I won best steam locomotive. So, I mean, it's a small thing. It happens to everyone, really.
Yeah, I mean, when it came to designing the brick, I mean, I was typing in locomotives so fast, I didn't even recognize a spelling mistake. But yeah, like you said, it's like a special, unique prize, so to say.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's a whole market for like misprinted Lego, isn't there?
Oh, I don't know if anybody's going to want best locomotive. It must be said.
Well, to be fair, I'm not looking to sell it.
Well, that's a good thing to hear. So we're going to be jumping straight into this new list of questions. So straight away, what can you tell us about your current Lego train collection?
So the locomotives that I have at the moment, I think I'm getting up to around 20 of them. The majority are Australian designs, so I like to build mocks of real prototypical engines, mostly steam. I'm very much a big steam engine fan, but in the last couple of years, I've been really getting into diesel and electric locomotives as well. Yeah, there's a wide range of them from all eras. Really, I like to build locomotives that I've seen in preservation, especially. But you know, there are some locomotives that I'm just like, yeah, that looks really cool. I'll build one of those. More recently, getting a lot more into British stuff, which is I am well British born and raised, not necessarily British by nationality, but I have recently started building more British engines. Obviously, I built the LNER Hush Hush in 2021, which ended up winning Best Steam Locomotive in the Brick Train Awards Global category, which was pretty wild, especially when you get a phone call or an email at 3 a.m. saying, hey, you've won. That was quite the wake up call. But I've also built the Silver Link, yeah, which ended up being the winner of Best Steam Locomotive in the TLR Awards. And yeah, most recently, as some people may have seen on social media, I built the Flying Scotsman and that was sort of a hybridization of both British and Australian prototypes because I specifically designed the Flying Scotsman as it was when it came to Australia in 1988 and 89.
So yeah, I remember seeing online your version of the Flying Scotsman, and straight away I loved that you used the what was it, like a 4x4 macaroni piece, I think it's officially called, for the splashers. And I thought it's such a different take for the splashers, but it looks really good.
Yeah, that is. I can't take full credit for that design. That ended up being something that I sort of took inspiration from. Oh goodness, I his name escapes me. It might be Tomas de Groot, but on Flickr, the guy who built the Blauwe Brabander, which was an absolutely beautiful machine. Obviously, I'm probably stumping everyone right now with my Dutch pronunciation, but you know, I am Dutch, so that sort of thing comes quite easily to me. But that was just an absolutely gorgeous model, and he used the 4x4 macaroni tiles as the splashes, and I thought, I've got to do that. And it took me a while to sort of figure out how do I actually attach them to the locomotive, but once I got it down, I was like, yeah, okay, now the design is really coming along.
Absolutely. And I also remember seeing that you have instructions for these models on your or at least for the Flying Scotsman on your own special website.
Yes, yeah. So some people listening to the podcast may actually know me as the guy who runs Capital Loco Kits, which is a website where I put up instruction packs for a variety of locomotives that I've designed over the years. But the most recent one is the Flying Scotsman. I've got 3 versions up. I just put 2 more up yesterday. So I've got the Flying Scotsman as it was when it came to Australia with the big red headboard at the front. I've got the British Railways Brunswick Green as it is currently preserved, and the double tender and the headlight and the cowcatcher that it was fitted with when it went to America in '69.
So I want to quickly go back and touch up on your collection when you said you're bordering 20 models. Now,
Yeah.
I can understand some of the struggles when it comes to storing this because I have over 30 Thomas and Friends models. But the thing I get
Oh
away with
wow.
is, yeah, you hear 30, you think, oh my god, that's a lot. But at the same time, they're quite small models, and I am able to get them in a pair of boxes, safely stored, and they're bubble wrapped, and that's all lovely and dandy. I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure your models are much bigger, much more detailed, and if they got bumped when they're in the box, I'm pretty sure something's falling off.
Well, to be honest, if you so much as look at them funny, something falls off. They're very fragile. What I've got at the moment is a nice display case that I bought at IKEA. This beautiful glass case with a few shelves on it. And I can sort of line them up in rows of 3 or 4 per shelf. And I'm looking at sort of putting them on a tiered stack so that the ones at the back are also visible and not hidden behind the ones at the front. They're very large. Most of them barely fit in the case, and some of them don't fit at all. A few years ago, it's currently in pieces being restored, but I built a Australian 60 class Garrett, and it's so big that I basically have to chop it up into 2 halves so that it actually fits in the case or fits in any kind of storage box that I use. But yeah, these models are not small. I build in 8 wide. Sometimes I do 7 wide. Usually, if it's like a British prototype, I'll try to do 7 wide, just to make it look a little bit more proportional compared to the much larger Australian engines. And I think I've done 10 wide once for an American locomotive.
I was just about to say as well, I remember seeing your Hush Hush. Is that 8? Because it looks 10 wide, at least given how tall and how fat those drive wheels are. It looks like it would be a much more proper 10 wide model, but it's only 8 studs, isn't it?
Yeah, the hush hush is a bit of an anomaly because it sort of goes by the rule of proportion rather than the rule of scale. It's not to scale by any stretch of the imagination, but it was really just that I started to design the weird lumpy boiler shape, and I was using all these sloped pieces and putting it all together, and I thought, yeah, that looks really nice. That looks very similar to the real thing. And then I put it next to one of my other models, and I went, oh, this is very big. So it is this weird sort of outlier in the collection, and I've thought a few times about scaling it down. So you're right, it probably should be 10 wide. Given its height and its length, the width is probably too narrow. At the size it is now, it should be 10 wide. But I have been thinking on and off about scaling it down, so making it a bit smaller, a bit more proportional to my new Flying Scotsman. But at the same time, I'm like, well, it's a bit of the Trigger's Broom or the Ship of Theseus, right? Is it still the same loco? Once I've scaled it down, I'll have to change the slope pieces and the design techniques. The driving wheels will be too big, so I'll have to get new wheels. And, you know, this locomotive is the one that won the prize, so I almost don't want to touch it almost.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I remember as well, or there's a guy who is in a Lego Thomas Discord server. He's recently been undergoing this little expedition or excursion, whatever the word would be, in building a couple of big American engines at 10 studs wide. And they are pretty huge, it must be said. So I have said to people in the past who said, yeah, what do you think about building this? Any advice on how to try it this way? I have said to people, there is such a thing as too big. As someone who has made a bunch of American inspired articulated giants, There is such a thing as too big, so maybe trying to modify something from 8 to 10 might be more painful than you think.
Yeah, and I think once you start playing around with 10 wide, not only does that affect the overall size of the locomotive and how you build that and whether or not it then impacts the overall appearance of the locomotive, but you then also have to take into account anything you build in terms of a layout suddenly has to be far more, wide and far more accommodating to a very large locomotive. When space is limited, or you're working on a collaborative layout with a lug or a Lego group, that's not always a luxury you can afford.
So, having mentioned a couple of models in the previous question, this kind of ties in nicely to what I'm going to be asking you next. So, what is your favorite or standout model that you have built so far?
Oh gosh, that is a question. I suppose I can't really nail down one locomotive that is like my favorite or my standout. Generally, I love all my models mostly equally. Obviously, I would be tempted to say the Hush Hush because that was, for me, that was the big winner. But, it's a nice model. I have my issues with it. Obviously, it's a bit out of scale. It's quite out of proportion. I've always had a bit of trouble getting it to run properly, so it's always a little bit of a bit of a white elephant anytime it goes to a show. It just kind of ends up going around once, exploding, and then being left on a siding for the rest of the weekend. I'm very fond of my new Flying Scotsman. I really love that I took it to its first show about a week ago. This is, just a standard model railway show, and the local Lego group were doing a little loop of track there just to entertain the kids effectively. And there is that sort of, I don't mean to sound too harsh, but there is sort of a stigma in the model railway community against Lego, right? Lego is for kids, it's a toy. And it's really fun when you go to one of these shows and you see all these people walking around looking at these gorgeous handmade layouts, and they see the Lego and they sort of turn their nose up at it, and then they sort of do a double take and they're like, that's the Flying Scotsman. And I had heaps of people just coming up to the table and just asking questions about it. So I think it's a really beautiful model. I'm very happy with how it turned out. I still need to give it a good test and make sure it goes around curves and everything. In terms of my favorite, yeah, I mean, I've also got my XPT, my high speed train, which the British may recognize as being the Australian equivalent to the HST. It's literally the same engine. They just sort of took the design and built their own version of it. And I've got that, nice four-car train, all ball bearings, so it rolls really nicely. Beautiful in orange and red and silver. And that one's a real head turner at shows. And I've also got I've got locomotive 3801, which is, sort of the Australian equivalent to the Flying Scotsman. It's a big green Pacific, and that one is very popular at shows as well. I get a lot of enthusiasts pointing that out and being very impressed with it. So, yeah, in terms of my favorite or standout model, yeah, it's hard to choose, man. It's really hard to choose.
Yeah, that's very fair because having built trains for so long, you refine your craft, you hone your skills, and you have a selection of models that you all line up and you go, I love all of these. Which one's my favorite? But so yeah, you do get that moment where you stumble. But I definitely
Yeah.
understand the idea. Well, the term I know it as is recency bias because the Flying Scotsman is your latest creation, I believe. So the fact that
Yes.
this is the newest thing I've built. Oh, I love it so much, and I've had that feeling loads of times when it comes to making new models. There'll be times where I'll build a new tender engine or a new Thomas character, and I go, "This is the best thing I've ever made." 2 weeks later, I'll build another train. This is the best thing I've ever made.
Well, that only means you're getting better at it, right? Because I look back at pictures that I've taken of my locomotives as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, and most of the collection has been through at least one rebuild since then. Those that have been around long enough for that. And I look back on how they used to appear, and I think, geez, they look terrible. It looks like an amateur. And we all start somewhere, and if you build one thing and you say that's it, that's perfect, I'm never going to improve on that, then you may as well quit building. You've always got to have your problems with what you've built. And I can already see some things on the Flying Scotsman that I'm like, oh, I need to do that better next time, or that doesn't work so well. And if the next thing you build is not the best thing you've ever built, then I don't know, maybe there's something wrong going on there.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. And there's definitely I suppose stigma is the right word, like you mentioned earlier. Well, maybe not in this case, but there's definitely been some people I've interacted with online, mainly in some of the Facebook Lego train groups where they'll build something, you can tell they're fairly new to the hobby, and they'll go, well, it's weird because sometimes I see people who will build something that you can clearly tell that they're newer to the hobby, they'll go, this is my favorite thing ever. I know it's not the best, but I am getting somewhere, and they understand that they're learning. And there's other people who will post a similar style of model, and they will go, this is the best thing ever. Forget everything that everyone else has made. I am the best. This is something that needs to be put on a plinth. And it's just bizarre to see how people can even say that to begin with. Like, you're new to, like, you don't, well, not exclusive to the Lego hobby, but you can't go into anything and do something adequate and go, yep, this is the best.
Well, you're not wrong. Yeah, I think there may be a degree of misplaced pride there. They're obviously very proud of what they've built, and they're maybe just not expressing that in the right way. I think and it goes the other way as well. I would have to argue that we have to be mindful of not gatekeeping the hobby. I have seen isolated incidents, and generally when it happens in a forum, it gets pretty quickly shut down by the moderators, which is great. But a beginner in the hobby will build something, and like you said, sometimes it's quite obvious that they may be very new to this, they may be quite young, and that they are not experts, quote unquote. I don't think it's fair to say anyone is an expert at building Lego trains. I'm not really sure that's something you can be a professional in. But you'll see sometimes people will say some not so kind things, that they sort of look down on it with derision. And I don't think that's very fair, because if I posted my models when I started building them on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or Flickr or wherever, and the response that I got was someone sort of smugly telling me how bad my models were, I would have stopped building, or at least would have stopped engaging with the community. So I think it goes both ways. When you are building something, whether you are a beginner, whether you're an expert, don't come in and say, this is the best thing ever, I'm better than everyone else. And when somebody builds something that you don't think is that great, kind of keep that to yourself. Or just, give them some words of encouragement, maybe some constructive criticism. I don't think we need to have this level of egotism. I'm not going to say that it is like rampant. I think it's very minor. I think it's very isolated. But it is something to be mindful of. We all start somewhere, and usually where we start is a bit rubbish. So I don't think it's anything to be embarrassed about. And I think to anyone who may be new and is listening to this podcast and thinking, oh, I've not built many Lego trains before, I'm a little bit nervous about putting my stuff out there, just do it, right? Just do it. Take the leap. You will be embraced with open arms by 99.999% of the community. There may be one bad egg in there. Don't listen to them, right? They started off in the exact same position as you, and you have nowhere to go but up.
So I want to quickly go back and talk about a standout model, in my opinion, that you've got, and it was one of the models that you submitted for the TLR Awards. It was your beaver tail observation coach, and seeing
Oh,
that back end kind of smooth downwards and to that rear, what's the word? Basically, that streamlined look into the beaver tail shape. It looked stunning.
oh, thank you. That's the one I'm very proud of. It's due for a bit of an upgrade. I sort of designed the beaver tail bit and then sort of, in my opinion, phoned in the rest. It looks nice, but it could look better, and I'm keen to do that when funds and time permit.
So what's that triangle? It's having money, having time, having space, something like that. I remember it's, well, a version I remember was back when I was in back in college, was having a social life, getting good grades, and having free time, something like that. So there is a triangle where you can have two of the 3 points, but you'll never have the third. So maybe you can have the money to be able to afford the bricks. Maybe you can have the time to be able to actually build the model, but never the space to be able to display or have some fun with them. So I think there's that sort of 3 point balance as to which two you would go for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're completely correct on that front.
So this next question has been modified recently to be a two-parter, and it is my favourite question and my favourite part of this podcast. So what is your ideal Lego train set? And what is the best Lego train set that you have owned?
So this is official Lego set, you mean?
Well, it doesn't have to be Lego branded, so to say, in terms of what's the best Lego trains that you've owned, because, Lego is just the term for the hobby as a whole. There are so many other companies that have put out some amazing train sets, which I very much appreciate.
My ideal Lego train set. Maybe just another a steam train, really. I think Lego sets are pretty decent for what they are. The Lego sets that come out, they are sort of the opening that people have, right? That's their sort of gateway into building their own mocks. And I think that the official Lego sets are serviceable for what they need to do. But I would like to see them do another steam engine like the Emerald Knight. I'm really looking forward to the Lego Ideas Orient Express that was announced a few months back. I'm curious to see what Lego does with that. In all honesty, at the moment, I'm sort of holding my breath a little bit. I have my reservations. I don't know if they're going to do something that can go on the track or if they're going to go the UCS Hogwarts Express route, which I was not a big fan of. That whole sort of, yeah, it's a big train, isn't that amazing? But it's way too big to go on your actual track. I thought that was a bit of a shame. But yeah, ideal Lego train set would be a nice steam engine, maybe a good number of carriages or freight wagons. I think a nice old, steam engine with some freight wagons could be a real winner. I don't know if Lego is terribly keen on doing more steam trains. I don't know if they sell particularly well. I'd imagine that they do, but I don't know if there's perhaps, Lego doesn't want to promote burning of fossil fuels or something. I don't know. In terms of the best Lego train set that I've ever owned, I really don't think my answer could be anything other than the Emerald Knight. That is just, I still have it. That still holds pride of place in my display case, and that was the first Lego train that I ever had. That was I got that when I was 8 or 9, and that came with my parents bundled that up with a pack of straight and curved track for my birthday, and from that point on, I was hooked. So in terms of sentimental value, overall quality of the build, I think the Emerald Knight is just generally a fantastic set. Yeah, that'd have to be the winner for me. And I think a close second would be the Crocodile that we got a few years ago.
That is a very good point you mentioned. Yeah, the Emerald Knight was a set that I've got. I got a similar sort of story where I remember seeing it in the magazine catalogue in the lead up to Christmas, and I kept on. I don't remember how often I did this, but I remember one particular scene, so to say, of me at the dining room table, my dad on the computer doing work, and I'm just staring at this one page of the image of the Emerald Knight in this magazine catalogue. And I keep going up to him and showing him it. He's like, "Yes, Luke, I've already seen it. You can stop showing me that now." And it's in the lead up to Christmas. And I remember getting it as a Christmas present. And it was just similar to you in the sense that it was one of the best sets I've ever... It probably is the best train set I've got as well. Sadly, my one has been modified to be a bigger locomotive, but the sentiment is absolutely there. And I also remembered you saying just now about the Orient Express from Lego Ideas. So I actually discussed this recently with a couple of other people. I didn't even remember that got picked because it was months ago when they announced it. And there was that side of me that went, oh my god, what if they do that UCS Hogwarts style set again? Because that would be a complete wasted opportunity. I mean, the guy who got the Orient Express on Lego... I want to say it was the same guy who tried to post it a few times. But then again, the Orient Express and the Polar Express are the only, not the only two, but the main two trains that you would see on Lego Ideas. So, I mean, there is a bit of frustration there in its own way, but at the same time, this is a golden opportunity to basically make the next Emerald Knight. But there's still that side of me that goes, "Oh, Lego, please don't ruin this. Actually, at least if anything, make it run on normal track."
I'll be honest, the UCS Hogwarts Express is not a bad set. I'm just not sure who it's for. Because if you're a Lego train fan, you can't run it. So it just becomes a very large and very expensive ornament on the mantelpiece. And if you're a Harry Potter fan, it may appeal more to you. But again, it's a very large thing that goes on the mantelpiece and does very little else. And, I don't have a lot of space. So I like things that are somewhat practical, right? I can take a train to a show and run it around on a layout there. I've got no use for a UCS Hogwarts. And that, to me, really does worry me because if Lego goes in that direction with the Orient Express, I would love to go out and buy one because I want to support and show Lego that people will actually buy a Lego train set, right, from Lego Ideas. I've looked at Lego Ideas over the years, right up when it was still called Lego Kuso. The number of times that a train has made it into the 10,000 supporters range and then not been selected. I mean, there's a good dozen or so in there. There have been a handful of Thomas the Tank Engines, which that's probably more of a licensing problem than anything. But I think we've had two or three Polar Expresses. I think we've had another Orient Express get in before, and also one from one of the Queen music videos.
Oh
And the
yeah,
big
the
boy,
Queen music Oh, I remember that one.
yeah, that was an interesting one. Again, it's probably a licensing issue. I would have been curious to see Lego's take on a 2800 class. That would have been unusual. But we've had the big boy get into the 10,000 supporters range a number of times, and that one's never been picked. And I think a lot of people are a little bit sour about that one. So I'm really hoping that Lego nails this with the Orient Express because I would love to go out and buy one and show, hey, Lego, stop ignoring them, right? Lego
Yeah.
is all about picking the ones that they probably have this sort of balance where they pick one that will make them the most money, going to appeal to the broadest market, and one that they don't have to pay through the nose for licensing on. And that might be, I think, where Lego Thomas has tripped up a number of times. I think the brand license is with Mega Bloks at the moment. Used to be with Lego, but that probably just is insurmountable, really, in terms of licensing. And I think that's probably why they went for the Orient Express. It's both highly recognizable because obviously there's a lot of non-train fans out there who are very keenly aware of the Agatha Christie novel Murder on the Orient Express, and as a result, there is a decent market of both train fans and non-train fans, which you may not necessarily get with something like the Big Boy, which appeals pretty exclusively to Lego train fans and probably can't run on 99% of people's layouts. So I think they've struck a great balance with the Orient Express, and I really hope that they don't mess it up trying to do something clever.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think with the Orient Express as well, whatever the final model is going to be, I think it will be in a similar sense with other sort of train sets we've had in the past. And these ones being, the Horizon Express, Emerald Knights, Crocodile Locomotive, where the set itself will be a really cool thing to have, but it will be or at least hopefully it will be a good building off platform for people to modify and kind of expand on further, which people do with sets all the time. But when it comes to trains, it can be quite easy to just build up the locomotive itself, figure out a way to make the boiler just a little bit longer, maybe add a wheel, customize it, change the colors. It doesn't have to be so difficult and so different from other sets. But I think trains are so unique in the sense where you can modify them quite easily. And I remember years ago, even in now, even in today's world still, where you see variants of the Emerald Knight, where people have built them in different colors, they've changed the wheel configuration, they've Americanized it with a different design tender sort of thing. But yeah, it's again, at least with my experience and exposure, train sets are much more easier to get into than any other theme of Lego sets, at least in my opinion.
I Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that Lego trains are a super malleable format. You know, you can buy the Emerald Knight or the Constitution Train Chase or whatever it was called, or the Horizon Express. Yeah, and you can modify it. Back in Canberra, I was part of a club where I think at some point, maybe 2016, 17, we lined up everybody's model of the Emerald Knight, and there were so many variations. You know, there were a few that were just the stock standard Emerald Knight. I've never had the heart to modify mine. It's very precious to me. But there was someone who sort of quote unquote anglicized it a bit more by giving it a sort of a rigid chassis tender like the Flying Scotsman and took off the smoke deflectors. There was someone who built what I could only describe as a chibi version, where they just chopped it in half effectively, and they just mounted the locomotive, very shortened boiler and cab, on the standard Lego train motor. So it was just this really chunky 040 Emerald Knight with a bunch of four-wheel carriages behind it. So you can really do anything you want with them. And I think, yeah, more than obviously modifying a Lego city set or a modular, which you can do, but there are fewer variations that you can do on it without it just looking derivative. But with a Lego train, you can just make really small changes to it, and it already looks vastly different. You know, and really, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that even the stuff that I build, which is, you know, completely unrecognizable from standard Lego, can still trace its roots back to Lego sets. I think on a number of my models, the chassis design is effectively just lifted from the Emerald Knight. So, you know, you never stop modifying really, and I think it's a hugely malleable thing.
So, a new question I've added to this interview list is something that is quite interesting in a number of different ways. So, going back earlier to what I said about having time, space, and money, if you were to build a layout, your dream layout, let's say you have infinite bricks, infinite money, and infinite space. You've got the full shebang, you can like snap your fingers, and dream layout is right there in front of you. What would your dream layout look like?
Oh, that is a good question because now my imagination is racing. Let's go with what you said: infinite money, infinite time, infinite space. I would have to say I would love to build a almost one-to-one scale replica of like Sydney Central Station or just a big terminus station. Heck, maybe even King's Cross or something. Just this huge, great big station with a vast mess network of tracks and a big overall roof and you know one of those ornate clock towers, all that sort of thing. I think that would look phenomenal. So if anyone's listening has like a spare $1 million and a warehouse somewhere in Sydney, hit me up. I'll build you a scale model of Sydney Central, and I'll come and play with it occasionally. No one else can touch it; it's mine. But no, I'm kidding. But that would be the dream, really, is to build like a big mainline station. Really, something that people will walk in and just their socks will be just knocked off. It'll be amazing.
So that immediately reminds me of a time where I went to a Lego show back in 2016. It was called Brick Live, and but then again, this particular model made it to two shows that year. So the Steam show, which is based in Swindon's Great Western Steam Museum, and of course Brick
I
Live,
know
like I
what you're
mentioned
talking
just now.
about.
So somebody, well, not somebody, like a team of people made. I'm going to have to find a picture, which I'll show you after. Actually, I'll get the picture now. But basically, like a team of people found the like the time and the space and the ability to transport what they call Manchester Brickadilly Station, and I have
Oh,
never seen anything as big as that before in my life. Not just for a trains related model, but just a Lego. Like when you go to Lego shows and you see a massive spaceship on the table, and it's something to behold. This was beyond that. It was incredible. That's the station in question. It's like 8 tracks wide, including platforms. It's I don't know how long, and that's one sort of straight section on what is a massive loop. The Steam show came first, I think, and then
Right.
Brick Life took place a little after. After that show, this got dismantled and the pieces were used for something else. But at the same time, with how you described wanting to build a gigantic station, this was the first thing that came to mind. And this is evidence to suggest, yes, it is possible.
Oh yeah, that is incredible. I've not actually seen that before. I actually thought you were going to mention the person who built the Swindon Works out of Lego, which is also an absolutely incredible piece of design work. But I'd not seen Manchester Brickadilly before. I love that name.
The guy who built Swindon Works, he's in the same UK Lego Train Club that I'm in as well. And I have seen it in person. I believe I've seen it in, which one was it? I think it was Steam last year? But yeah, it's like you said, it's just seeing massive displays like this. And because the guy who built the Steam Swindon Works is in the same Lego Train Club as I'm in, we had a members meet a little after that particular show. And I had a chat with him to say, so what's it like to actually kind of make this? And he said, well, it took 9 hours to set up. And after the show, it took 3 hours to pack down. I'm thinking, is it really worth it? I mean, having to build something like that is insane. But 9 hours you need to be there the day before the show to set up. And you need to have like no interruptions. You need to have all your like food and drink with you. You need to pray that you don't need to use the loo as you're trying to set up. It's, oh my, 9 hours. That's on. That's. I don't know if I could do that. I really don't know if I could do that.
I really think it sort of it almost comes with the territory, really. If you're willing to, if you sit down and you think to yourself, I'm going to build Swindon Works out of Lego bricks. I think at that point, no matter how long it takes to set up, you've kind of committed. Yeah, but I mean that it sort of comes with the territory. But I am sort of on and off when space permits, building a model of Yass Junction, which is a sort of country station here in Australia. It's this beautiful Victorian era station building, double track main line, 3-track goods yard with a little branch off to a small village nearby. And, that is already in itself. I've only built the station platform, right? So I've built about a third of what I expect to build over time. So I've got the station and the platform and half of the goods yard. And that can take me 3 or 4 hours to set up at a show. And that's partially because it is quite large, but also because being Lego, you stick it in a car and you drive to a show, it shakes itself to bits. So I have to spend a few hours at a show setting up, meticulously putting the footbridge back together. But, I do it because I love doing it, right? I think it brings a lot of joy to people who come to these shows, and it gives me a lot of joy to see my trains chugging along through a station like that.
I can kind of relate in some degree as well because back in November, the Lego club I'm in did its biggest Lego show of the year. It's called Bristol Brick Show, and I thought, okay, this is the biggest show. Let's bring my whole layout. So the way I've built my layout is there are sort of 7 by 3, 32 by 32 base plates, and that fits on a standard 6 foot by 2.5 foot table. Now, with what's on them, it's not the most complicated layout ever, but for the sakes of transportation, I have to basically break down each segment so all the loose bits and all the bigger, chunkier bits are off of the base plates and that's all put into a box. So storage is basically sorted and that's all fine and fun, but that basically means if I want to take this to a show, I'm going to have to reassemble the layout. And I'm not one of those people who would have a section. I would love to be able to be one of those people who could just keep a section built up so I can just grab it out of the box, slide it onto the table, connect it, okay, done deal. If any of the pieces have been shaken off during transport, I could live with that. It's so annoying in the sense that when it came to that show, when it came to setting up that layout as well, It took 2.5 hours, I think, because I put on a music playlist in the background because I was one of the first people to set up for that show. The entire playlist,
Mhm.
well, it's only like 24 or 25 songs, but the entire playlist finished, and I still wasn't finished, and I thought, oh god, this is actually taking forever. And then with me, me and my dad were setting up the layout, so there's two people going at it. It's not just me. Just like, oh my, how much time am I wasting with this thing? Seriously.
Yeah, that would be the dream, obviously, is if I'm building a layout to sort of follow in the footsteps of the standard model railway groups, where you see these exhibition layouts rock up, and they're all in modular sections. Like they load them into a trailer, they pull them out, they flip everything open, clip it together, test the electronics, done deal, let's go home. That would be great to do with Lego. I don't know if it's necessarily practical to do that, especially given that you're working on a much larger scale. But that would be the ideal. That would be the dream, to make setup and pack up as efficient as possible, because you do get to a point, especially if you have to sort of reach over a table for extended periods of time, that you're like, okay, everything is cramping up, everything is hurting. I just want to be done and go home. And yeah, it can get a little frustrating.
Okay, so moving on to our final question now. What projects do you have in the works, and what do you hope to build in the future?
What do I have in the works at the moment? Well, not a whole lot, to be honest. I've recently sort of moved house, and just kind of trying to find the space for everything I've got at the moment. A few months back now, I actually let go a few of the models that I had. I moved them on to other people who'd shown interest in them. So, they go into a good home. I'm happy with that. But I just didn't have the space for them anymore. So I'm a little bit wary of what I'm going to build next, because it all depends on what I have space for. I think there's one train that I have that I'm working on at the moment, which is a little bit on ice for the time being, which is the London and South Western Railways T3, which is a 440 tender locomotive, currently restoring the only surviving example to working order at the Swanage Railway, which was one of my local railways when I still lived in England. And that is just my favourite steam locomotive of all time. I think it's an absolutely drop dead gorgeous machine. I've been working on it on and off. At the moment, I need to find a way to make the decals that I need. At the moment, it looks like a weird mishmash of different colours, because I used elements that Lego doesn't produce in green, for example. So I need to find a good decal maker that isn't going to, put me massively out of pocket, to just finish up those details. And then I need to move on to the wheels, because I'm trying to keep it 7 wide. So it's got sort of, I would almost say they're less than half thickness driving wheels. So you think, a Lego driving wheel is about one stud thick. And then obviously the smaller wheels are half a stud thick. And these ones are almost like a third thick. It's very strange, and unfortunately my 3D printing skills are not quite up to snuff. So I might need to go and ask someone who's a bit more experienced if they can just print me an entirely unusual set of custom wheels.
So I can definitely understand the desire to have thinner wheels, and I reckon this goes back earlier when I said that there is such a thing as too big, and there is probably such a thing as too thin. I think that it could potentially work, but something tells me that it could be really frustrating having to constantly re-rail that section of the model because of how thin those wheels are.
Yeah, yeah, you're probably not wrong. I think generally what you have to keep in mind as well is that the Lego train wheels are ridiculously thick. Like the driving wheels are ridiculously thick, because they're obviously designed for the insanely tight standard Lego curves, and they have to have a very wide profile, because if you just had close to scale or just a little bit thinner wheels, it would just be sinking between the rails every time it hit the corner. So it has to have this very wide margin of error for those tight corners. My T3 would probably not be going through corners that are any tighter than R104, because that's what all my other locomotives run on. I've got two complete circuits of 104 and 120 track from Trixbricks, and that's just what I run on. So I'm not terribly concerned with that. And I think just in general, it's probably not going to get a lot of operation. It'll probably just sit on display. Maybe it'll move back and forward occasionally. So if it doesn't quite sit happily on the tracks 100% of the time, it doesn't bother me terribly.
Yeah, fair enough. And I wish I could be one of those people that says I run on R104 as well. The widest curve I've got is R72, so my layout is currently set up so it's 3 tracks. I've got loads of the standard curves, so I thought I may as well just use them. But for the longest time, I stuck to having 56 and 72 radius curves. So yeah, I mean, that's also surprising in its own way, where, like you just said, there are people who specifically build their models to run pretty much exclusively on wide radius curves, and R104 seems to be like the standard for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, I mean, just in general, obviously being a bit of a hybrid Lego builder and scale modeler, I feel a deep pain when I see trains going through those insane Lego corners. So I like the wide sweeping curves, and even as a modeler, even 120 and 104, you're looking at it going, that's pretty sharp. I would love to see my trains going around one of those. I think they've got it up to like 172, 190 now in terms of radius that these sets come in. That's a little bit too much for me, just in terms of space, but it would look magnificent. But I recently found out at a show actually that, quite to my surprise, most of my locomotives actually get through 72 curves. That was a real nail biting experience. We had a whole fiddle yard set up at one corner of the layout, and they had it all set up so you'd run off the main into a siding, and then you'd sort of loop around the outside of the fiddle yard and then come back onto the main via another switch. And I was looking at it and I was going, how are my trains going to get around there? And I thought, well, it can't hurt to try. And it was right on the edge of a table. So, if the trains did derail, it was a long fall down to the ground. And it went around, and you could see the locomotive sort of squealing around the corners, but quite to my surprise, it actually got all the way around and worked quite smoothly for the rest of the weekend. So that was quite the adventure.
That's good to hear, yeah. And that reminded me of something as well, where you talked about model railways and real railways, in fact, having curves that are really big, wide, sort of sweeping curves. There was a video I saw on YouTube a good long while ago by a model train YouTuber who decided to take some flexible track and match some of the radius curves for. So this was for double O gauge specifically, and he thought, okay, I've got to use this flexi track to match radius 3 curves, and then 2, then 1, and run some engines on those curves just to see if it could manage going around those tighter curves. And then he went to what would be sort of radius 0, radius -1, radius -2. And when he got to the last one, I thought, that is basically Lego's R40 curves. And it's really stupid to see that actually exist. Because when you see it in Lego form, you're so used to it. But when you see that with, well, not real track, but, model track that is supposed to represent real track, it looks so stupid. So yeah, I understand that sentiment completely.
It looks pretty wild, but it did actually get me thinking, and it might actually be a good segue here into future projects. That I was looking at the radius of curves that custom third party producers make, and I was thinking, yeah, they're making bigger and bigger and bigger curves, and that's great and all. And then I noticed, oh, they actually do smaller than standard Lego curves. What kind of madman would want those? And I was looking at them, and it's R so standard Lego curve is R40, and then they had R32, R24, and I think they may have even been working on an R16, or maybe that's impractically small. And I was looking at it, and I was like, what? Who would want this? And it got me thinking, and it's one of my sort of longer term projects now, but I thought it would be really fun. Is maybe do a little dockside railway. You know, these little harbourside railway lines, particularly in the UK, where they have these absolutely tiny little locomotives to run on them, with these insanely sharp curves because they have to sort of squeeze between all of the warehouses and wharves. And I'd love to pick up a set of 20 R24 curves or R32 curves and just make this lovely little harbourside diorama, maybe on like a 2x3 base plate design. I think that could look really fun, and that would be a nice experiment with these ridiculously, almost comically tight corners.
So when you said about the tighter curves, it reminded me of an April Fool's video that Trix Bricks did. I don't know if it was last year or probably the year prior, but they properly made what was classed as R8 curves. So they would all clip together. It's difficult to describe, but imagine having 4 8x8 square plates and you put them together to make a 16x16 plate. The circle of, so it's basically 4 curves make the circle, and all 4 of them are basically all connected to each other in a way where there's no space anywhere on the rails at all. And there was a video of I think it was a motor on that curved track circle. Well, if you could even call it that. Well, technically you can, but yeah, I remember. I'm gonna have to find this after we're done here, because they did a video where they had the actual track, had a motor going around it, and there were people genuinely saying, I really want that because it looks stupid and fun and it looks amazing.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a level of gimmick to some of this stuff
Yeah,
that
that's
would
the
be
word,
very appealing
gimmick.
to people.
Okay.
That would be really cruel if you said to someone, "Hey, let's have a race with our trains," and then just sort of surreptitiously just stick an R8 curve in their section of the layout. It's a good launch pad.
Before this video ends, I would like to remind you all that I have the membership program active for my YouTube channel. So if you want to support me in a more personal way and see some more content on my channel, then consider joining today. There are many perks, including having your name mentioned at the end of the video, like you could see here. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Awout, thank you so much for joining me.
You are very welcome. It was an absolute delight.
This has been a very lovely conversation, and it's been amazing to get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, it's been really, really lovely. I've really enjoyed it.
So there's definitely been a lot of people who have come on the podcast and have really enjoyed themselves, because this is a great opportunity to just talk about this incredible hobby. Because there's only so many people that you know in real life that you could go up and say, oh, look, I made this Lego thing. Have a look and talk to me about it. And they kind of just don't get it. But a space like this is one of the sort of better places to be able to do so.
Oh yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. You know, I'm very fortunate to have been wherever I've gone, be part of communities that build Lego trains. I love that the community is growing ever stronger on the internet. You know, we've got all sorts of forums on Facebook and Flickr, and I'm assuming Instagram and Twitter. I'm afraid I don't use those two. But, you know, I think this is really great. Obviously, you guys over in England, you have the Lego UK Railway community. I think that's fantastic. I'm really glad that people are finding each other. And I think a podcast like this, bringing people on to talk about the hobby that they love so much, I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea. And I wish you all the best and every strength as you continue on with this.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. So please take this time to advertise and sell yourself with what you got going on online. If you want to shout out any social medias you got, feel free to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best place for people to go if they're curious to see some of the stuff that I've built, maybe you're interested in some of the instructions that I've said I'm selling, check out my Facebook page, which is Capital Loco Kits, and our website, capitallocokits.com. I've also got a Flickr account under Awoutro, that's EWOUTRO, or my name as well, which is just Awout Rolling. Yeah, I post there from time to time. I'm usually pretty active in general Facebook groups about Lego trains, so you might bump into me, and if you're curious about anything that I've built or you just want to say hi, just drop me a message. I'm usually on the computer.
Links to all of his social media pages will be linked in the description down below. thank you all ever so much for watching, and we will BRB with more BRBs. Thanks again, everyone, and we shall see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.